Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. My voice might sound a little odd here. I'm talking at about half my usual half strength because I am recovering from a flu, perhaps. We think that's what it is. Everybody in the house got it at some point, some version of it. My daughter was extremely sick last week and was out of school for a few days. And then I got whatever this was and lost my voice for a couple of days. And even in the previous episode, I was planning to have a 20 or 30-minute recap section where I was going through the first three episodes of Paradise, which I want to talk to you about for a minute, Sona. And that turned into like a 1 minute intro going like, I think this is as long as my voice is going to last. So this is as much of an intro you're going to get to this episode. And then had a conversation with Darren where we discussed the first episode of that show. I do want to bring it up now because we will be discussing that show week to week. Darren and I will be discussing it. The first three episodes available now, and the fourth episode dropping this week. I was curious if you sampled that at all, Sona.
Okay, first of all, I'm not ready to talk TV yet. What is the flu vaccine count in your household? I need to know.
Only my wife had the flu vaccine.
And how sick did she get?
She had like nausea and things. She did not have significant illness.
Okay. So that's my own personal research that I'm doing in the interest of my own health. That was first.
I did not only have a notification that I should be getting my flu vaccine, my wife, when she got her vaccine, had also been saying, oh, I should probably take our daughter to get her vaccine as well. But she didn't do it. And then, of course, it's been really bad. I don't know how bad it is in New York. I assume it's been just as bad because my office, my 9 to 5 work, the office is in the Midwest and they've gotten hit really hard. So I assume this is happening everywhere. But man, like the whole school was sick.
Yeah, it's going around quite a bit from what I understand, flu A specifically, people are saying. But I do hope that you all feel better soon. And my next question to you is going to be, how was your birthday? Happy birthday,
thank you.
Victor.
It was not very eventful.
I was sick as a dog.
Exactly. I took one day off from work, was babysitting my daughter and homeschooling her, and just took the day off from work as well. Yeah. And she had like tests and everything. It was like I told my wife, I spent like 4 hours of the day like homeschooling her. It was a lot of work. And she had already had a backlog
when you're
of work.
Sick is the worst thing that can happen.
And then I went back to work the next day. And other than my voice, I felt fine. But literally and this was the day before my birthday, by like 4 o'clock, cannot wait to just crawl into bed. And the second I logged off of work, I went right into bed and I slept for 16 or 17 hours. And then I woke up the next morning and felt much better. But yeah, I was mostly resting. One thing we did do on my birthday, by the way, we had plans to go eat at a restaurant.
Nothing brings your appetite back like having the flu. Everybody knows that.
Exactly.
People love to eat a heavy meal when they have the flu.
It's exactly what happened. And my wife was like, do you really want to do this? And I was just like, you know what? I ate like 0 calories yesterday and I ate like a sandwich at lunch today and I feel stuffed. Probably not today to go eat at an expensive meal somewhere. So instead, we did something I love to do, Sona, and something I never do with my wife, so rarely do. We went to see a movie on my birthday, which was quite a pleasure.
Amazing. What did you see?
We saw Companion. Have you heard of this movie?
I haven't. Quick summary. What's it about? Who's in it?
I would rather not tell you. It has
okay.
I'd rather not tell you because this movie has been spoiled. The biggest twist in the movie, a movie that has so many twists, it is so much fun, but the biggest twist in the movie is given away in all of the marketing. So I took my wife to see this because I assumed she did not know because she's just
I'm flummoxed that I have not even heard of this movie. Okay, go ahead.
I got to tell you, I've been watching the NFL games, obviously, and I avoid trailers. And I'd heard that this is going to be like one of those movies everybody's talking about. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to spoil it for myself. And during every single NFL game, there would be those mini commercials that are like 10, 15 seconds long, and each one basically giving away plot details in the movie. And I'm like, why are you doing this? I don't understand. It's very frustrating to try to be spoiler free and have it spoiled just inadvertently doing something else is very frustrating.
I went to see the Dog Man movie and I went in totally unspoiled.
There you go.
And in fact, for some reason, I had convinced myself Kevin Hart was one of the voices in this movie, and he's not. I don't know where I came up with that.
You know
So the
why? I will tell
Dogman
you.
movie was full of surprises for me.
I will tell you why, because this is a spinoff of Captain Underpants, the movie, and Captain Underpants is
Ah,
voiced with by Kevin Hart. Yes,
thank you.
it's the 6 degrees of Kevin Hart, or
I mean,
two.
I'm a big Kevin Hart fan, so it's like I don't understand.
How was that? That was a huge hit, by the way.
Obviously, we were there for our kid who is a giant Dogman fan and had his heart set on seeing this movie for the longest time. And I just know he and all his classmates are going to be, talking about it when they come back to school on Monday. So I wanted to make sure he'd seen it. I have to say, as a grown adult, I sometimes have a hard time following the plot of these children's movies. Um, could be there are some plot holes there. I'm not sure, but there were some overall very nice messages. I'm not sure I entirely followed the plot, which is the same way I felt about Sonic 3, which I saw last weekend.
Wow, you are really taking it on the chin for your son there.
Yeah, Sonic 3, we needed, our cleaning lady was coming by and we needed to get out of her way. So that was what we did. And Dogman, I explained to you while we were there. But I've had my fill of children's movies for, I don't know, probably till summer, I'm going to say.
I have heard that Dogman the movie is very funny. Is it? Did you laugh?
It had its moments.
Not your speed though. I'm pretty sure they killed that cop. I mean, I think you can confirm this though. No, can't
You mean the one that becomes Dogman?
the decapitated cop. I think that's pretty much the end of
Yeah,
the cop,
I'm
right?
well.
Well, is that
I'm
a
not.
spoiler? Okay,
It
I've read
happens
that.
within the first 5 minutes of the movie and really focused. I just know that this Dogman came into existence. I have seen wittier children's movies. Let's just say that, but it had its moments.
We have read the some of Dogman, the books, and yeah, in the books, the cop is really dead. They cut his head off, so that's how that works.
I mean, there are, the inconsistencies that as an adult, you're kind of like, well, why is it that this character is an animal but can speak, and this character is half man, half animal, but can't speak English? Those things get you distracted sometimes.
If this was in Lumen or something, they could have been like, he's a dog at work, he's a cop at home, or vice versa. Maybe it would be more effective.
That
But
would be so convenient.
it's a switch you flip.
Yeah. But anyway, back to Paradise.
Oh, before that, I do
What?
want
Yeah.
to spend a minute on Companion, though, because I do want to
Oh,
recommend it.
sure.
It's
Yeah.
super entertaining. I think you'll like this. You may not because it does have a sci-fi element to it. So I'm not 100% sure on that, but really clever, like such a smart script. Even when you're like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. No, you don't. And then the script is so smart. Like, for example, very late in the game. And once again, I'm being so vague here because I don't want to spoil anything, but very late in the game when you're like, wow, this is such a ridiculous situation. And there's so many movies when you're inside that ridiculous situation and you kind of lost, you're so much in that context, you forget like what this would look like to an outsider. And then an outsider kind of comes in and sees what's happening. Then like it has the correct, reference to be like, what the hell is going on here? It's like,
Mm.
it's very funny. Like it's just these really surprising twists over and over again.
Is
It
there
has these
anybody that I have heard of who's in this movie?
The lead actress is Sophie Thatcher, who plays Natalie in Yellow Jackets. Of course, Yellow Jackets is coming back.
Hmm.
Pretty popular right now. She also had a very interesting horror movie from last year. She's kind of becoming a scream queen here. This isn't really a horror movie, by the way, but definitely has, it'll appeal to horror movie fans, let's say. She was in a movie called Heretic with Hugh Grant.
Hmm.
And she was the star of that as well, one of the stars of that film. So excellent performance there, excellent performance here, like really an excellent performance here. It starts off like a rom-com. She meets her perfect guy in a grocery store. And this is not a spoiler, it's in the trailer. It's also the first scene in the movie. She meets him. You see this perfect meeting between the two of them. And she says, the two greatest days of my life were the day that I met him and the day that I killed him.
Wow.
And that's the first scene of the movie. It could be about like an obsessive relationship. It could be
Hmm.
about a really, really nice guy who's maybe not as nice as he seems, or only nice when he gets exactly what he wants. It is about those things. It's about toxic relationships, but it's about a bunch of other things. There is a whole other genre of movie, a whole other storyline that is running and fully developed at the same time as the storyline that I'm not mentioning here that is spoiled in all of the marketing material. But there's a whole other story that is developed in full alongside this plot A, let's call it. And I'm like, this cannot possibly work, and it does, and it's very fun. It's like a really impressive writing, directing. I know as vague as that sounds, but you know what? This was probably going to go straight to HBO Max. It's had a pretty solid start. It's got excellent word of mouth, an A score from audiences for this type of genre of movie. That's very high. Like usually horror movies or horror adjacent movies get really bad word of mouth from even fans because everybody kind of expects something else from these movies. Word of mouth's been really strong. The critical reaction has been very strong. And this is maybe something that will be on HBO Max within the month or something like that. And maybe at that point, we'll have a deeper conversation to it. But I would recommend seeing it in the theater. It's a lot of fun. Oh, and by the way, the reason I wanted to see this with my wife was I knew she would have no idea what's going on. I knew from jump what the main twist was. She did not. So we had two different experiences of it. So she literally was shocked at this moment that comes maybe 30 minutes in when the first big reveal comes. I knew going in, but the movie is so smart that it's written assuming that you know. So like as you're watching it, you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. Oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah, it's such a smart film that doesn't rely on the twist. It assumes you know the twist, and it's still very smart. In some ways, maybe a richer experience knowing what's to come. So maybe not so negative that they market it the way they did. My wife knows nothing about it, and that's why I'm trying to avoid any kind of spoiler. And when the twist came, she was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. It's like, yeah, I know. It's fun. So anyway, a lot of fun. And that's just twist one out of like 20 twists in that movie. It's a very twisty,
Well,
very fun, funny as well movie.
that sounds like a great birthday for you.
It was. And we very rarely see movies together. So that was a pleasure. Oh, and so Paradise, did you watch any of it?
So I'm assuming that it's going well if you're going to continue talking about it week to week. So that's great. I think ABC was rerunning the first episode at some point this week, and I came across it and I saw the last 15 minutes of it, and it all seemed very strange to me. And then I fell asleep.
That's great.
So that's what I've got for you on Paradise.
Oh, that's too bad. I
Sorry.
mean, that's okay. We are going to continue to cover it here, not because I'm confident that this is going to work, but it is very much the show it wants to be. It is very entertaining. It's interesting you saw it on ABC, even though it's on Hulu and it has swearing and nudity in it, for example, which I'm sure was edited out of the ABC
Maybe
version.
I would have stayed awake if I had
Not
that
in
part.
episode one. I don't think that happens in episode one, though.
Oh.
But the reason I mentioned all that is because it very much feels like network TV, where you have these hooks. And I said this in the mini review we did earlier last week. It does that television thing where at the end, someone is photographed and there's something happening on the narration that makes you think like, aha, this is the culprit. And then, of course, immediately in the next episode, they're like, no, it can't be that person, and it moves on to the next. But that is very much like a TV series. And the mystery does seem to be very intriguing, the things they're not telling us as well as the things they are telling us. It's entertaining. It's and it could be a very, very silly when it all comes to resolution, but it is entertaining so far.
Nice.
And with this most recent, the episode that's premiering this week that we'll be covering here on the podcast, we'll be halfway through the season. So it's a pretty quick watch. It may not be able to sustain itself for 12 episodes. Speaking of not being able to sustain itself for a long season, I am, maybe we just preface this conversation because I still have a few other things to touch on pertaining to Severance. We'll finally start talking about Severance now. I was shocked at where we have come to 3 episodes into season 2. I mean, this is a 10-episode season. I would have expected what happens at the end of this particular episode to be maybe at the end of season 2, not in the 3rd episode. This is a shocking.
It's amazing. And even before that last scene, the stuff that happens at the end, immediately before that started, I had the thought, wow, this show is really moving. They're not dwelling. Whereas I think earlier in the episode, you know how I feel about the goats. I kind of thought, I don't know about this. But by the end, they had me back, and I was already appreciating how much plot development there had been. And then that last thing happened.
Right.
Wow.
The goat thing doesn't bother me as much as it bothers you. However, I will say that in this particular episode, spending so much time on that graded even to me. And by the way, watch this also with my wife. This is appointment television for my wife. And she's kind of like, I don't know about this whole goat thing. I'm like, I know. I'm right there with you. So the whole goat thing is a is a barrier of entry to a lot of people actually, and it's so
Oh,
funny that they're so. I mean, they're doing fan service here because people love the goat mystery, but I'm like, I mean, not that interesting to me. But it is a fascinating thing about this episode, and I still haven't seen what the audience reaction to this episode is. I assume it's pretty positive because I feel the same way you did, where in some ways, the whole goat sequence is maybe the thing I like the least ever of this whole entire show.
agree.
And
Agree.
then it is in an episode where everything else in it is absolutely outstanding. So it is, everything. I think about
Yes.
Milchick's scenes.
Oh
I
my
think
gosh,
about the
amazing.
scenes with Helena and Cobell. I think about the scenes between Dylan and his wife. I mean,
Hmm.
the scene between Irv and
I don't know, but I know who you mean.
Felicia. Felicia,
Yes.
like a beautiful scene, such a tender scene. Anyway,
Yes.
everybody else's scenes are extraordinary. And then you're like, oh my God. And then we spent 10 minutes with the goats. You got to
Really.
take the good with the bad. You got to take the good with the bad. Okay. One thing that I want to just shout out for everybody to know, there's a lot of talk, even on the Reddits and stuff like that, about Miss Huang and where she
Ugh.
came from and all of that. By the
I've
way, I
seen
don't know,
some of the Reddit headlines and I do not like them.
this has already been given away on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a Lumen page, and Miss Huang is on LinkedIn with an announcement from Lumen. They're like kind of giving accolades to their first, like a mentorship program with schools at schools. So basically, she is there as a, what would you call this? Like an intern, basically, right?
Okay.
So anyway, like all this supposition about like, is she child labor from a, from a third world country or something like that, which maybe she is, and maybe that's a cover story, but they have it right on the Lumen webpage. So if you want to know more about Ms. Huang, or some information about her is available on LinkedIn. So do go to your LinkedIn account if you ever go on there and look for Lumen and check out their news releases. And Ms. Huang is one of the stories in their feed.
I continue to love her character. I love her
Yes.
deadpan approach to things. Do you want me to share with you what I've seen on Reddit regarding Ms. Wong?
Yes.
People believe this whole Lumen project is about cloning,
Yes.
and she is actually cloned from Gemma.
Oh, yes. I've heard that. Yes. I've heard that as well.
I don't like it. I don't want that bit to be true, and I hope it's not true.
I
So,
do not think that is true, but I have
and
heard that
that,
theory
this
as
whole
well.
goat project has something to do with the cloning, which then, because I had that idea in my head, at some point, someone says to Miss Wong in this episode, I think it's Dylan, are you ever going to explain why you're a kid? And then I thought a kid is a baby
Oh, yes.
goat.
Someone said that before too. Yes, yes, yes. Mhm.
It caught my ear, but you know how I feel about all of this. I find it all very dicey, and I don't want that to be the case.
One thing about that is in a Ask Me Anything type session with the cast that they did last year, they were reading out all of these internet theories. And some of them, they were like, no comment, no comment. But people were saying, like, oh, the goats are cloned and the people are like grown from the goats and it's all human cloning and blah, blah, blah. And they 100% said that one's 100% wrong. So even though they're going to keep people on the internet is still going to keep hypothesizing around that. And maybe this is intentionally, they know that these theories are
Sure,
out there.
yeah.
So they're intentionally goading those people, goading. No, they didn't mean that.
Huh.
So, didn't mean that as a pun, even though they are, teasing them with that. Maybe it's intentional that they're throwing these little Easter eggs to them to keep them following that storyline. But they're saying that is not. But we'll see. Maybe that's a misdirection too.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, so that was the LinkedIn thing. Do check it out. The Lumen website, the LinkedIn profile is very funny. There's a lot of Easter eggs in there too. You should check out. Most of it, I don't think
Mhm.
spoils the show. It's just funny things like there's like a behind the scenes video where Dylan shows you his workspace and stuff like that. It's very entertaining. The next thing I want to mention, Sona, Ricken's book. It's available on Apple Books.
I
A
heard that.
it's not
Yes.
only we've only listened to a little bit of it by the way, but it's available as an audio book as well. It's free. You can download it for no cost. And it's written by the actor who plays Rickon, and it is hilarious. So do check it out. It's only like 70 pages long, which comes out to be I don't know, it's well under 2 hours to listen to the whole thing, which we have not. But it's, we can listen to it 10 minutes at a time, and it's very, very funny. So if you have an Apple device, it's free. Just go into your Apple Books and download it. Oh, Stiller's directing again. Just wanted to shout that out. Excellent directing here, an incredible, impeccable,
Mm-hmm.
and you really start seeing like why this show cost as much as it did. Every decision and every shot and every texture on the screen is so thought out. I'm like, yeah, they must spend so much time in each one of these episodes, like a movie length production for each one of these episodes. And that's why it takes 2 years to make this show. And the last thing I'll do is we'll circle back to it when we talk about it in the show. But Terrell Tillman, the actor who plays Milchick, gave a really interesting interview where he's talking about the race of Milchick's character, which was written as a black man. And during his interview process with Erickson and Ben Stiller, he did like a Zoom. This was during COVID, a Zoom session with them to audition. And he started to ask them questions about like, well, if he's a black character, you're defining him as black, then what does that mean in the context of Lumen, etc. So apparently this changed the way that they wrote the character going forward. And this scene was very importantly part of that discussion.
Interesting.
And he talked about his reaction to seeing the pictures because the scene when he receives the pictures is the actor seeing the pictures for the first time. So that's his actual reaction to what he's seeing there. But do check out his interview. He says some really, this actor really says some very pensive things about feeling this person who's a real, true, loyal company man, but then feeling like he is such an other inside of this world. It's really thoughtful, his answers. I should check out but I'll track down the article if I find it again in my feed, and I'll include it in the show notes so people can read along or just search for it. I'm sure if you search him by name, Terrell Tillman, Severance, Milchick portraits,
paintings, yeah,
you will definitely find this article. And it's really, really good one. All right. If you don't have anything else to talk about, we could get into the episode finally.
Let's do it.
All right. There's so much to talk about. Cobell Vig wakes up inside of her car at the side of the road. This is a Volkswagen. Is this a Rabbit or a Golf? Do you remember what the car this is?
Do you know what? I don't remember. What I remember thinking when I watched this episode is that I have fully accepted they are in an unascertainable time period to me that is not the current day, but they have cell phones, right? And yeah. I'm just going to go with it because there's too much other stuff for me to get distracted by why all the cars are a very dated model.
I have a theory of this. I think I've already mentioned to you, but there are like Bausch and Lomb up in upstate New York, not that far from where the actual Bell Labs is that this is shot at in New Jersey. But a lot of these kind of abandoned industrial upstate New York towns that really developed around, like Bell Labs, by the way, where the whole entire city developed around this giant corporate center.
Yeah, you have mentioned it, but I still don't think it explains. I mean, people really love cars, really love cars.
This is a good point.
I don't. Right. But people do. And so if you're living in a society where there are cell phones and that type of thing, those modern conveniences,
right,
no matter how much of a company person you are, at least half these people would want a car with the modern conveniences.
You make an excellent point there. I was going to say that having everything there, it obviously makes sense when you're a contractor and you're staying somewhere and you have the company car in the driveway, which has happened to me in the past, by the way, when I was out in like Michigan, for example, and you have to drive this car that has chains on its wheels and literally looks like a car from the 1970s that is just there because that's what's there for you to drive. But you make a really good point. These people aren't just like contractors. They are living there for long periods of time, and they never even, like, for example, like they don't have like a motorcycle in their driveway or a flat screen TV or a higher end flat screen TV in their homes. They just accept whatever's there. I mean, I think you make a really good point. Like you keep the flip phone and don't get the iPhone.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just doesn't add up for me, but I literally had the thought while watching this. I guess I am just along for the ride on this. I'm going to stop questioning it because there's too much other stuff to pay attention to.
We are in a world, though, where the Stone Roses exist, though, even though that's a band from the 1990s. So it still does not truly define anything because that was in the tape deck in the car. But is that something that Cobell listens to on a regular basis, or that's simply what came with the car? Who knows? We still don't know. Yeah, so she wakes up on the side of the road. This very much feels like the film Fargo, all that white on white
There were a
This-
few things in this episode that felt like other movies to me. We can talk about it when we get to them.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear that. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many. I think there are many references to other
Yeah.
films throughout. These are obvious, like film nerds. So, I do you have any theory? I read this as she's definitely running away. Right? She's had the confrontation with Mark. Pretty much gave away
Yes.
the whole Gemma thing. She is on the road heading to I don't know where.
And I guess it's someplace very desolate because why would she not just find a truck stop roadside motel to sleep in? I don't know why this lady would choose to sleep in her car, but
It feels like this place might be really out there, remote, intentionally so,
right.
right?
Yes, I suppose so.
I think that is a good observation because I think that it tells you something that she couldn't stop at a motel or something.
Right.
Theoretically, she may have seen other signs before, but that moment where she decides to turn around and go back,
Hmm.
it has what's the name of the town? Salt
Yeah, I know
City,
what you mean. I can't remember. Salt City sounds right.
something like that. Definitely salt in the title. 250 more miles or something. That may be the closest major city where she could maybe get some kind of assistance or at least start over. And maybe she just decides it's a little too far. But I don't know how to read that, to be honest with you. She may have been going somewhere specifically. This is very important, of course. She looks down multiple times in that first scene, and we don't see it pay off until later in the episode. But when she decides to make that U turn, she looks down at the ground and she has the respiration tube again
Hmm.
that has her mom's name on it. And once again, we'd seen her clutching that in season one when she was fired by the company. And she was really devastated to not be working on the severed floor again. And of course, she smashes the shrine and then holds that tube to her chest and starts crying. So there's something, this connection to her mom. We still don't know how she thinks she's going to reconnect with her mom. And it requires her being or running her own experiments of some kind on the severed floor. As much as I've, rewatched season one and everything else, as far as I know, there's a really very few clues at all as to what her overall agenda is in this whole thing with her mother. But we know that is something that keeps compelling her back. And of course, she desperately wants to be back on the severed floor. And we'll see that later this episode.
Hmm.
Funny when the show is so isolated and has so few locations that just seeing her, driving that far away suddenly makes you realize in a way that like how remote they are in some ways.
Yes.
And all it takes is to almost like put the camera in a different place. The fact that this place is so remote, if it indeed is, does raise questions I've had before about the whole situation with Devin and Rickon and theories about the fact that maybe Lumen controls the area around the compound, even though we do see people protesting and being against it.
Hmm.
Because you still wonder, like, why is Devin there? Is Devin only there because her brother moved there? There has to be a society there. And if there is, then I guess maybe it is kind of like those upstate New York cities that sprawled out around like Bausch and Lomb and places like that, where everybody in the area has to do what Lumen wants because even if you don't work at Lumen, they are the industry in the area, right? So maybe it's something like that
Yes.
where they kind of just loom large in the local imagination. We see Mark early on. He is arriving at work. He's timing his arrival from the car all the way to entering the elevator.
Yes.
Oh, we can talk about the elevator here for a minute too. And it turns out much later on in the episode, it turns out that he's trying to imprint some words like an after image on his retina of this message, which is the title of the episode, Who is Alive? If that's where the inflection is supposed to be, right? Who is alive? Who is alive? Who is alive?
I mean, I wasn't sure about that message really being helpful to
Right.
somebody, even if it did work. But what I really loved, to your point earlier about how fast things are developing, this is thrown out, this is discarded by the end of the
Right.
episode
Absolutely
anyway.
discarded. Right.
So,
It's very funny to see this early on and then see what he's trying to actually do later. And I'm like, aha, now I
yeah.
see what he's trying to do.
Hmm.
And then in my head, I'm trying to make it work. I'm like, okay, in the car, he's counting to 33, 34, which was his count from his locker into the elevator. So then I'm thinking, oh, he's got to get it into his locker. So he needs to have some kind of battery pack or something. And then 2 minutes later, it's like, nope, we're cutting to the
Hmm.
chase. We're just cutting to the chase. This seems like a terrible idea, though, right? 2 minutes? Like, what is he staring at the sun? Like, you're going to be blind after this. Like, permanently imprint these words on your retina.
forever, wherever you go.
His Eddie just wakes up blind with this message in his eyes.
I know. It's like, the advice not to look directly at the solar eclipse.
Exactly.
He's purposefully creating that situation.
Something you had mentioned that I hadn't heard in the last episode, and then another theory, or read up on it a little bit since our last conversation. There is indeed two dings when
Hmm.
the other people enter the elevator, and people are saying like, oh, the first ding is like the elevator door closing. The second ding is the innie being activated, and we don't hear that with Helena. I think they are playing with our understanding of who is Helly, who is Helena, when is she one or
Sure,
the other.
sure. Hmm.
But the way I read the scene still remains the same at the beginning, where the elevator door closes and then we cut away. We cut away before the elevator descends because they want us to be in that limbo. But I don't think that the actual second ding is like, aha, that's the innie activating. I'm like, no, I think that's just like they arrive at the lower floor. But we do not stay with Helly in any way. The elevator door closes. We don't see her POV. Everybody else gets the POV shot where they like funnel
Hmm.
down to
Hmm.
black. We do not see that with her, right? So we don't see any of the things we see with the other folks. So even though I don't think that the second ding is like the innie activating, I do agree that it means that, like, yeah, we are not privy to any of that experience because we're supposed to be doubtful as to what version of her she is.
Hmm.
So the fact
I
there's so many
agree.
theories is because we're supposed to
Right.
be questioning it. When they arrive, when Mark arrives at work, he has the sketch, Miss Casey. This is Irv's work, right? You have to assume this is Irv drawing Miss Casey, right?
Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time, but that is what makes sense.
It also much of looks seems like the style that we
Oh,
see.
that's why I'm saying it. Yeah.
I liked all of these interactions among the team, by the way. We, of course, start seeing that Dylan is distancing himself from the rest of them because he wants to earn his latest reward. I forgot to call this out in the previous episode. I love that sequence where Irv is hugging Dylan and he tells him about, I've seen this picture. There's another floor. I don't know what it means. When he whispers that to him because he's afraid that they're being listened to. Before then, where Dylan was saying, if you were gone, I'd miss you. And he says, Dylan, I'm your favorite reward. Actually, that may be true, not only of his friendships inside, which of course is part of how you get motivated, but they've discovered that, hey, you know what? Now that he knows he has these kids and a wife, that can be a way to motivate his work as well. And more importantly, maybe not just to motivate him as a MDR employee, which apparently he's the best one of them, also as a way to keep him in line, right?
Hmm.
And it does pay off to some extent by the end of the episode.
Very interesting what happens with his family.
Oh, yes. This is such a great sequence of events here. I like when he said, we can go talk to the other groups. Remember, Lumen is listening.
Hmm.
And they're
Hmm.
like, I bet they're listening to everything we say.
Yes.
And Irv goes, I also picked up on. And he's like, okay, well, let's keep it discreet. And Mark and Helly decide to head over to the goats. I don't even know. Oh, well, we discovered what this group is called. They didn't know what it was called, but we do now.
Yes, we do.
And Irv decides to head over to O&D for the first time, apparently, since Bert just
Hmm.
left.
I mean, that's his assignment, right? So,
Right. And then let's talk about the whole Helly theory again here. There's a few different interactions here that almost have different readings to me.
yeah, to be honest, I was so interested in everything happening in this episode that it was not top of mind to me. So I wasn't watching it with a super critical eye regarding which version am I seeing of this
Right.
person. So I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, we can go through them one at a time because I have almost contradictory readings on them.
Mm,
The first one is when Irv is like, okay, I guess I'm the one who's going to go to
yeah,
O&D. And Helly grabs his arm and she's like, we're here for you. We're like,
yeah.
and this seems compassionate, but this is still a little bit off, right? But then
It
I'm
felt
thinking,
awkward. I agree. It
right?
felt awkward.
And yet I can't picture Helena doing that or thinking to do that unless Helena is doing some kind of performance and thinks, well,
Right,
maybe Helly would do this.
right.
And then I keep thinking, well, maybe the Helena theory is still true because then the next interaction is when they're Mark and Helly
Hmm.
are in the hallway together. And how did you read that whole thing, right? Because Mark definitely seems to have feelings for her, right?
I mean, there's definitely some tension there, which is, I think, heightened by the fact that they're talking about finding his possibly not dead wife from the outside
Absolutely.
world. So the whole context is very strange, but it definitely had that feeling of, are they going to kiss right now? I don't know.
Exactly. And she definitely wants him to get, like, she does that half, like, half step forward, like, kind of,
Yeah.
and he almost does it. And then he's just kind of like, okay. And he walks away. And I, once
Hmm.
again, can't read if maybe these feelings are more on her side than his, although he definitely seems to have feelings for her. He even kind of acknowledges it, where it's like, are you uncomfortable? Not only in this episode, but previously, being like, are you uncomfortable with pursuing Gemma?
Right.
And she's like, no, you're doing that for your outie, because he literally says that, is this weird? Like, when he says to her,
Yeah.
is this weird? It's like, we have a thing. Is it weird that we're trying to
Yes.
reunite the other person? Right.
Yes. Yes.
So that seems to be
And
the overt context of that interaction. And then he has, put a move on her right now. She wants you to kiss her. I didn't understand it.
thinking about, well, is it because he and Helly had that moment in the past and they still have this chemistry between them? Or is it because, we saw Helena watching that video and so intrigued by it, and maybe
Right.
that's a
Mhm.
feeling she hasn't had and she wants to
Right.
have
Yes.
that feeling. So now she's trying to force it by being like, remember, we kiss.
Right.
So I could see it going either way.
That's why that interaction is so vexing to me, because on the
Yeah.
one hand, why isn't he making a move? They have an opportunity.
Yeah.
On the other hand, regardless of who's in her body at that moment, she wants him to kiss her.
Yeah.
And he's just like, okay, let's go. And which is like, okay, you kind of missed your opportunity, buddy. You don't have that many chances in this place. And then on her side, is she like, this has not been that long a period of time since they kissed before. Maybe she's just like, hey, here's our chance. Let's do it
Yeah.
again. Right. And of course, she is also maybe pushing it a little bit, because she's like, this is kind of awkward that we're looking for your ex-wife. And,
Hmm.
I need you to reinforce our feelings in some way.
Yeah.
Kind of just shrugging it off. And then lastly, like you said, I literally had the same read. This could be Helena being like, hey, I want a little bit of that. I want to see what it's like, So,
Hmm.
and she thought she was going to get that opportunity, and she doesn't get it. So, yeah, many question marks about all these interactions. And of course, the fact that they have a whole carved out scene where it's just the two of them, they want us to be thinking about all these things.
Right.
And then the next thing I want to talk about, to like, is it Helena or Helly, is not until we get to the goat room, but we'll get there. All right, let's go to Milchick. First of
Oh
all,
my God.
Mark's balloons are floating through the hallway, like
Yes.
pathetic balloons or not. He walks in, and Natalie is there, of course, with the board on her headset. They have a gift for him. Sona, does representation always matter? Is this a good version of that?
So when I was watching this scene, I thought of that phrase, if you can see it, you can be it. And I thought this is just the worst way to play that phrase out. I had mentioned a few different movies came to mind when I was watching this. And here, this whole feeling is very much reminiscent of Get Out to me in this scene.
Yes. Mhm.
I don't like this. It makes me very uncomfortable. Yes.
Extra creepy to all of this, of course, is that final thing she says, where the board wants you to know that I also received a similar present when I ascended at the company. And then this actress, that frozen smile and that
Hmm.
sharp intake of air, and she's like, all right, Seth, I'll see you soon. But it's like, speaking of Get Out, it's like that scene where
Mm.
the mask slips on that one character. No spoilers here, but it's like something like that, where you're like, oh my god, like, what's happening here? And there's a real tension there between the two of them.
The actor playing Milchick did an excellent job of telegraphing WTF with his eyes.
Right.
It really was like he had this pleading look at Natalie to say, please connect with me here about how twisted this is and how horrible this is and how inappropriate this is. And, it just was so clear in the looks he was giving her.
The really interesting thing that the actor said in his interview, when the interviewer asked him, how does he interpret the paintings? And he said, on a very positive note, you can imagine that this company is taking this figurehead, this Cure character, and is decentralizing him from the story, which is actually like they're willing to replace him in a way in their own mythology, which is a very positive thing. He goes, but at the other point, to be inclusive and bring me into their company, they primarily see me as just black. And like, so it is something that he goes, in trying to be inclusive, they have othered him even more, which I thought was an interesting way to interpret that.
Yeah, I mean, given that this is based on a real person, it's arguably a version of blackface,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
obviously very
Exactly.
offensive.
Right. I would say that it is at least in its representation, it is one notch above it, where they've gone for really like a merging of the
Yeah,
two
no, I
person,
understand. That's
as
why I said a
opposed to literally just taking a
version.
Kier character and just
Yes.
darkening his face, which would have
Yes.
been really, really offensive, like incredibly
Yes.
offensive. He mentions that in his answer as well, that it is a form of blackface. But yeah, this is a sticky topic to say the least. And I think it obviously matters that these two people in the room are relatively few
Yes.
people of color in the show, in the corporation, presumably as well. Do you have a theory on the board? Is Natalie talking to somebody?
I
I
have
know some people don't
no
believe that.
idea what is happening with that. There are so many references to the board, and sometimes they seem like an anonymous entity,
Yeah.
sometimes they seem like real people. There probably is a rhyme or reason to it, but I haven't figured it out.
I don't think it's as bizarre as it presents itself to be. The show is oftentimes what we've discovered over the course of the show itself and the mysteries unraveling, as strange as these mysteries obviously are. But I feel like they are presented in a way with absolutely no context, so that when you experience them at first, they are so bizarre. And then as you discover what's actually going on, it's not as strange as it seems. And I
Mm,
think that's kind of my, Occam's razor explanation for this, is that the speaker, even though it is presumably, a communication, back and forth communication, but it is not. It is a one-way speaker, right? Like they are listening to you
yeah,
speak. And then Natalie is listening to them. And that is incredibly awkward because you're assuming like, oh,
so
they're going to talk
awkward.
to me. And they're like, no, 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 they're talking to Natalie. That seems to be like, oh, it's so weird. They're there and they're not talking to me. And it's like, no, it's actually just this callousness of being like, I don't need to talk to them. That's just represented in this fact that the speaker is only there to hear you, even though like very little communication is happening in both directions. But I do think Natalie is actually receiving your voice, and you do hear muffled voice sometimes on the audio. Sometimes you hear nothing. And as a matter of fact, Cobell called her out on it and says there's nobody there, and yanked it out of her ear last year when she got fired, and
Mm,
goes, is there even anyone there? And then someone says yes on the way on the other side. So I believe it's exact. So I think the theory is actually not as bizarre as it seems. It's basically, you're so far beneath us, you don't even need to hear us speak.
right.
Before Irv heads out to O&D, tries to recruit Dylan. Dylan makes up excuses as to why he can't really come. He's like, oh, you'll be more stealthy if you go by yourself. Of course, all of this is like, I have to be in my best behavior because I want this reward. He does mention to Dylan about the painting, that I've been able to recreate it from my memory. Last week, when I mentioned I couldn't really understand what was happening, where Audi Irv said my innie got the message, for some reason, I wasn't seeing the most obvious version of this, which was simply to say that if he wakes up and he's at Bert's door, right? The Audi version of him wakes up and he's outside of Bert's door and he's like, how the hell did I get here? And then he drives back home and he sees his paintings have been, picked up, dropped on the bed, moved around. The files are open and the addresses, including he's holding the map in his hand with Irv's address. He's telling whoever, Ragabi, I presume, that my innie got, into his body and understood to some extent what he was seeing, right? I think that's all he was trying to inform them of.
Yes,
So I don't think there's anything beyond that simple read.
right.
And that's when he heads out to O&D. But Miss Huang shows up and takes Dylan to the security office, which used to be a bad thing. So he's worried.
Hmm.
But actually, he's there to meet his Audi's wife, Gretchen, played by Merritt Weaver, an actress I really like.
She's so likable, isn't she?
She's such a great actress, by the way. She was in this movie called Women Talking. I think she got an Academy Award nomination for that, but she's really good if you haven't seen that movie. I think it's on Amazon Prime right now. There's such a tenderness to her, the way she's seeing him. That whole scene is so impressive, so impressive. I mean, and her performance is so interesting, especially when you see it juxtaposed to her interactions with the Audi, and you see their dynamic is so different. So she gets to be a different version of herself with this innie. It's just an incredible performance, I think. And like you said, I think you see her for, this is why you cast someone like her, I think. You see her for like a minute and there's just this warmth that comes off of her.
I was surprised that the family visitation suite is a real
Mm.
thing, as we discussed
Oh my
before,
God. That, yes, I kind of missed the whole,
because
yes,
it just seems like you're opening up a Pandora's
very
box to
dangerous. Yes.
do this type of thing. So I was surprised by that, and I'm interested in seeing the ramifications of that, if any. But I feel like there have to be some
Oh, it has
consequences
to be. Yeah.
of starting to merge the knowledge of the inside person and the outside person.
Right.
I thought it was interesting just to watch the awkwardness of it, right? Which, of course, it would be very awkward to be in this situation from either side. I thought it was hysterical that you chose to bring a photo of everyone dressed up in a
Yeah.
regalia from the Old West. Um, why would you bring that particular photo of your family?
You know what's funny about that though? It's like you can imagine here's a picture. She can't bring her phone in. So here's a picture she has of everybody together. And it's like, oh, them doing something fun. It's not like them at having dinner together or something without even thinking about the reality, like you said, that he's gonna be like, oh, this is where we live.
Very confusing.
No, that this is just them going in for an outing is very funny. The whole context setting of that was great.
Yeah, and I thought also, speaking to what you were talking about, the tenderness of it, right? When she's trying to explain what their life is like, and Dylan's reaction is like, oh, so I'm a screw up in the outside
Right.
world. And she
Exactly.
says, no, I love you, and I love you in that world. I thought was very sweet.
I was fascinated by the scene. I talked about it with my wife, actually. This idea that you could see someone that you lived with for years and then see a version of them. Like, is that the version of them you knew? Is that complete alternate version of them? There are these things that are the same between you. And man, like I gotta say, Merritt Weaver's face, I watched this episode more than once. I watched it by myself, then I watched it with my wife, then I watched parts of it again recently to take notes. And her face in this entire performance is so great when you see Zach Cherry doing his lines, and she's just studying him with
Yeah,
this compassion on her face, but like this curiosity. Just some of the face acting on this show is incredible.
I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a different version of the plot where somebody has amnesia and doesn't remember their
Right.
significant
Exactly.
other, right? Like regarding Henry or whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a very possibly an obscure reference. I
No one
love that
remembers that movie.
movie. Yeah, I love that movie.
You're
You
alone. No, I'm just
know,
kidding.
I may, well, my husband likes it too. I recommend it, honestly. That shrinking Harrison Ford connection. But
Right.
you're so interested in what this person would be like. And I think probably on some level, right? You don't want the inside version of your spouse to be like, really? I'm married to you. I mean, there's
Right.
so much stress. It's so fraught. It's so fraught.
There's a lot of funny moments here as well. I like the fact that when she comes in, she's like, "Oh, I didn't realize how weird this would be." Seth did warn me about that, and he says, "Who's Seth?" Like Milchick's
Yeah.
first name, and then Miss Wong goes,
Mhm.
"Please do not share any privileged information." I'm
That's
like,
right.
Milchick's first name is privileged information. Like,
That's
how is that
right.
possible? But apparently, it is. And then
And
she
his I like your sack, right? Is that what he
love your
says to
sack.
her?
Yeah, like it
Yes.
was her thing. It's like, oh, that's just they make us put our stuff in. I guess because so it could pass through the scanner or whatever. The other thing I thought was very funny was soon thereafter that she whispers under her breath. She goes like, "Who's that child?"
Yes.
Mrs. Wang's like Mrs. Wang, Mrs. Wang, I should say. If you hear someone whispering behind your back in your presence, it's kind of you pretend you don't hear them,
Right.
but
Yes.
she's just like answering, just all business while she's probably playing one of those solitaire games on her computer.
That's right.
This is a little crestfallen. I mean, think about Dylan has this opinion of his Audi. He believes all the propaganda he gets fed. And he's like, why would he send me down here if the world wasn't like a, hellish place?
Hmm.
She's like, well, he never really found his place. And like, I'm not a dick. He dumb? He's not dumb.
Yeah.
He's just a fuck up. And he kind of realizes that. And she can't even dissuade him of that. So It's a little heartbreaking. And of course, the whole scene ends. All the beats at the end I thought were so beautiful. One is her just saying, I love you, and being like, oh, I'm sorry, that was habit. And him like not knowing how to react to it, which of course makes perfect sense. I mean, you see somebody for
Sure.
the first time
Yeah.
in your life and they tell you love them. You're like, you're not going to say, I love you back. I'm like, I don't even know who you are.
Yeah.
It is awkward to say the least. I also love the fact that as she's walking out the door, just all the shot selections and everything, Stiller, of course, directing this so impeccably that there's that moment where she just decides to look back one more time just as the door closes. And I just thought, like, wow. And then we get to the goats.
Ah.
I mean, first of all, is it, I was about to say, not as good as I mean, from a production standpoint, this is an incredible production, right? It's an amazing, probably the most expensive thing they've ever shot on the show. But I don't know if I need all this.
Yeah. And something about it, and this is a movie that I haven't seen since it came out in the theater, so maybe I'm wrong, but something about the whole entry into the goat room reminded me of Being John Malkovich. Does
Being
that
on
make
which
any
is
sense?
which is absolutely a reference point for this. You think about people entering literally into other people's minds in that movie. I'm like, yeah, I think there definitely is a touch point here. I mean, all Charlie Kaufman movies in general, like we
Yeah,
talked about Eternal
especially as they're
Sunshine.
like crawling through the tunnel. Yes,
Right,
it's, I mean, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is, yeah,
right.
all over this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like it's like take any Charlie Kaufman movie and it's definitely in here. But I think Malkovich is definitely here as well. Speaking of 99, by the way, Being John Malkovich, another movie from 1999. In Being John Malkovich, there is an idea that you can rejuvenate your personality inside of somebody else, obviously by going through this tunnel, but in other ways as well. And that may very well be another Easter egg for what's might be happening here in the show. Because
Interesting.
Helena's father says, I can't wait to have you at my side at my revolution or something. I forget what he called it. What does that mean? Is there some kind of mechanism of reincarnation? And maybe that's part of what the severance process allows them to do, or at least this technology they're trying to develop. Okay. I do want to talk about the goats, first of all, before we crawl through the tunnel, or as we crawl through the tunnel, into the debate of this is Helena or Helly. One thing I forgot to bring up earlier is the strut. Helly, when she's walking through the hallway, and she's kind of swinging her hips and swinging her arms like really aggressively and kind of like sachets her hips back and forth, almost like a kid, like a teenage girl in a way, walking. And she has that strut when she's walking with Mark earlier, which is a very Helly thing. I don't think Helena would imitate the walk. That's the first thing I would say.
Interesting. Okay, I had not picked up on that. Very
Second one, yeah,
interesting.
check the way she's walking with Mark this time. It's very pronounced, as opposed to look when Helena's walking. I mean, she's probably not
Hmm.
walking at the same speed, but Helena does not have this
Right.
kind of like arms akimbo, hey, what's up? Like she does not have that demeanor in her movements at all.
Hmm.
Second of all, Helena may be willing to do certain things, but I don't know. Crawling through goat poop, I think she's going to be like, you're on your own for this one.
Pass. Yeah.
I don't picture Helena doing that. I'm sorry, no matter what.
Fair point.
And I actually love the way the room is shot, just the concept of this, like this looks like real grass. They must have grown it. And then I'm just thinking literally, how did they produce this scene? They must have grown the grass and then built the set around it, right? Like because obviously they couldn't just dump dirt into a room. And even if they did, the grass wouldn't grow there. So this must have been quite an achievement in design work here. And some of these people, the one guy who's like the dad goat, who's like wearing a goat skin
Yeah.
on his head,
Right.
it's so bonkers, like some of these design details. But then there's the things I don't like so much. I mean, these people, what do their outing lives look like? Where do these people live? or are they just permanent innies? Who knows?
Permanently there, possibly, because they're
These people do not look
so,
like they have an active social life outside of this place.
yeah, they're so disheveled and
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know what goat herders typically wear, but
Right.
their outfits are not what I would imagine a modern day farmer would wear. If that helps anything, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a genre of British horror which is called folk horror, where it's like city people move to this to the
The countryside.
countryside, to the rural areas. There's some crazy cult going on there, or they have their crazy ways, and they end up killing the city folk or whatever. And they're always these kind of weird, inbred, toothless wackos out there. And it really feels like that, which is, I mean, maybe there's more to these people, but this presentation of them seemed very off-putting. Like and not just for humor's sake. It's just like, if you start thinking for a second about like, how did they recruit these people? Where do they find them? Where do they live when they're outies? It just, all of this makes no sense.
Right.
But their ringleaders, I don't even know if we know her name. The actress is Gwendolyn Christie, who played Brienne of Tarth, by the way, on Game of Thrones, for anybody's a Game of Thrones fan. She's great in Game of Thrones, by the way. Very different performance than we see here. She's 6'3", by the way. She's a very imposing person.
Wow.
In the Game of Thrones, she is a knight, even though she's a woman. So she's a very imposing. She can like basically kick anybody's butt. The context of this is funny, or in the fact that she thinks they might be there to kill her, which of course, when they ran into O&D last season, they had some of the same fears. These people don't talk to them, don't trust them. They might have pouches. So all of this stuff was actually seeded in season 1 and, plays out here again. They have to actually prove that they don't have pouches. So there's an Easter egg back to the first season. But in general, this is a lot of expense to expound on the goat thing, which I unfortunately think is probably going to be important later on in the show. And then not your favorite thing.
Not my favorite.
Some of the dialogue is funny here, though, when they're trying to say, we're looking for Miss Casey. Have you seen her? She used to run wellness. And she says, we don't abide such fripperies here as wellness.
Yes.
And once again, Helly, this seems to be much more Helly, right? When they kind of surround her and she grabs the flyer and she starts to say, like, have you seen her? Have you seen her? That seems to be not a Helena thing. That seems to be Helly doing that thing she does where she reacts and takes control. They do eventually win over
Mammalians nurturable.
Nurturable.
Which makes me wonder, somewhere is a room of mammalians unnurturable?
Nurturable, maybe. These are the ones that can be fed.
Yeah, running wild? I don't know.
Finally win her over by saying, if one of your goats ran away, wouldn't you want to track her down? And then that says, yes, we'll keep an eye out for her and we won't intercede with your investigation. But that's it. I mean, once again, I am pretty sure, unfortunately, that this is probably going to be more involved in the plot, but it seems to be just this little aside for now. For a show, this particular episode, where every sequence seems to be so essential, setting things up for the future, this really feels like they just threw it in here to have a little goofy fun. And I mean, that's how I read it anyway.
Maybe, but I will say the part where I can't remember how she says it, but she calls all of the goat herders, for lack of a better term, to come out and surround Helly and Mark, had a very horror movie feel to it.
Oh yeah, I think they're definitely playing into those type of folk horror movies I was describing before.
Yeah.
And maybe, that they can be herded. I do wonder if there is, this is my concern, by the way. Are these like goat people, like goat/people? Is that why they're kind of misformed and they can be called with a bell and stuff? Like, I'm like, I don't want that to be the case. Are they just joking that they're lumens trying to turn people into sheep of some kind, like into some kind of cattle that can be easily controlled? Maybe these people are just like failed experiments that are now only good to herd the other goats. I'm not sure. It worries me.
Oh, I'm worried too. But this is probably a stray tangential thought, but one that entered my mind is that goats have a cloven hoof, right? And things with a cloven hoof are generally symbolic of evil and Satan and the devil and all that.
Yeah, I mean, when we see there's one of the 4 tempers is represented by a goat. And in the end of the first season, when they're all dancing at that waffle party, the only male is the goat character with the cloven feet and everything. So it very much looks like a fawn, like, oftentimes trickster elements to that type of character, or even demonic elements to it, depending on what kind of mythology. So yeah, there definitely is. They're definitely playing on all of that. I actually honestly thought there would be something much more demonic. There's like that split second in the trailer when you see the goat-headed person coming up over the hill. And it's so surprising that so many things in the trailer seemed like it would come very late in the season. And I'm like, here we are in episode 3, and almost every single shot from the trailer has popped up on the show already. So they're giving, once again, the plot is moving very quickly. But yeah, let's move on from the goats. Unfortunately, I don't think the show's going to move on from them, but let's move on. And let's talk about something that I liked a lot better, which was Irv and Felicia. Very sweet.
So sweet.
Even if you rewatch season 1, that even late into the season, Felicia was like, they shouldn't be here. First seemed to be negative towards Irv, and then eventually just seemed to be very protective towards Bert. But now to see them like now that Bert's not there and they have this thing in common, just very sweet to see how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and I love that she shared with Irv how long he took to fix his
Fix
hair
his hair. The only
before.
time he was ever worried.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something I was talking to my wife about in seeing this scene. I love the fact that we were just watching like the Day of the Jackal, for example, in our coverage here in the podcast. And towards the end of that season, there are big plot points that literally the show just jumps right past. It doesn't even bother to explain how they got from point A to point B, which really frustrates me. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, but at least do the bare minimum. And I was so impressed, like in this sequence, it seems like such a minor thing, but this is the kind of little details that the show, I think, here is so impeccable about. You know, you can imagine in the writer's room, someone saying, we need someone to find out where the elevator is. Okay, Irv needs something to do. Okay, let's get Irv finds out where the elevator is and he has the painting. All right, so who does he talk to? Okay, maybe Felicia and O&D used to deliver packages to that wing of the company. So she would know what it looks like. And then she just drops this to him or leaves him a note or something convenient like that. But it's not, right? They actually say, well, Irv draws pictures. So he draws pictures of Bert
Mm-hmm.
and he's talking to Felicia
Mm-hmm.
about Bert. And then he shows him the pictures. And then when she flips through, she sees the other picture.
Yeah.
So you get to the same
Mm-hmm.
destination, but the show has not only thought about all these things, it makes them have a tender moment together. So it's like it's really just working. Like the level of specificity here is so much better than you ever see on most shows. And it, you know, like I said, it makes the sequence of events believable, and it makes you like Felicia more, and it makes you feel like, God forbid something happens to Felicia now, we are vested in her outcome, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, she tells them that there's this exports hall, which is
Right.
interesting to say exports. We do know that Miss
Mm-hmm.
Casey went through that door. Where are they exporting them to? And also interesting that they used to deliver packages there through that
Yes.
elevator, but not anymore. So something's going on there. And of course, he asks her, do you still remember where it is? Which I'm sure she does. And yeah, so now we know that they know where this place is, or will know soon. So actually, all of those storylines are happening in parallel with each other. And honestly, having like the goat scenes interspersed with the Dylan scenes, if anything, kind of undercuts those. I really didn't like some of the way that this was put together for that reason, because, you know, I'm much less vested in that.
Sure.
But then we jump actually directly from the Dylan interactions with his wife to the Audi version of Dylan. What did you think about this? That just actually, first of all,
Mm.
juxtaposing those two things, seeing them having these very, very different interactions with each other. I mean, they seem to have a successful marriage. They don't seem to like dislike each other in any way, but it's such a different dynamic. Like Merritt Weaver's performance is completely different here.
Yeah, I mean, we learned about her. She seems to have a security guard uniform of
Yeah,
some
my
sort,
guess as
right?
well. Yeah,
And I wonder if she works for Lumen as a security
that
guard.
would be interesting. Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, it seems to very much be the type of interaction that you kind of have when you are in it with small children and you're just trying to keep all the balls in the air, right? You're distracted by so many things that you're not even focusing on the conversation you're having. I forgot to make the cookies. Well,
Plus, he
just,
doesn't even know how to make cookies.
yeah.
This guy is a screw up.
Uh, he would be a pocket door. That tells you everything. I liked this little insight into their home life, but yeah, it wasn't exactly heartwarming, right?
Exactly. There's not that real tenderness that you felt where she was really protecting him in that previous conversation, because she knows that there's an aspect of her husband, right, who's never really found his way. And we saw that in the conversation when he was looking for work in the last
Yeah.
episode as well, right? Like
Hmm.
he was so curt with her, being like, oh, if I didn't answer, maybe there's a reason I didn't answer, right? There's
Yeah.
that he obviously is dealing with this limitation in a very negative way on the outside, and probably not happy to be back at Lumen again, considering he couldn't find any other work. But then seeing that gentle version of him inside, I wonder if she's going to want to visit him more often. That's going to be, maybe I'm just coming around to that. Maybe that is going to be a plot point later in the show.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of weird too that he seemed hung up on getting health insurance in that other episode.
Right.
But I mean, it seems like she works. Why does she have health insurance? But neither here nor there. I
She may
thought
not
maybe
work
she
full time,
was
right? She could be like,
maybe I thought maybe she was going to be pregnant and that's why
right.
I don't know. These are all stray thoughts that I had.
Oh, before we move to the next scene, I just remembered, check this out, everybody. If you want to rewatch this episode, speaking of being so detail oriented in the production of the show, check out the Danger Mouse episode the kids are watching in the background. I wonder if someone actually, I'm sure on Reddit, I have to do research here. Someone has tracked down this specific episode of Danger Mouse. The kids are watching Danger Mouse, and in the episode, Danger Mouse and his friend, whatever his name is, have tied up some bad guy and brought him into this house. And the guy who's there, the scientist, pulls out an X-ray and says, "Lay him down here," something like that. And they put the X-ray over the guy's head, and he has an implant in his brain.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, wow, they like found something that like relevant to Severance in this
Interesting.
this Danger Mouse episode, and they included it somehow. Whatever show they're going to watch is going to have some relevant connection to the plot of the show. Back in the main plot, though, we have Rickon and Devin. Natalie is that Rick talking to Rickon. The you are, the innies love it, but we need
Hmm.
an innie version. There's certain language that resonates better with them. Obviously, they're trying to smooth over the relationship. They're trying to keep Mark engaged at Lumen. We've mentioned it a bunch of times that cleaning that Cold Harbor file is very important, obviously.
Yes.
I guess a way to keep Rickon in the fold, which then allows them another way to manipulate them potentially or to monitor them.
The word is out about the book, so I guess it's kind of like a damage control too, right?
Yeah,
About,
yeah.
trying to reframe it so that they can maximize its usefulness to them.
Once again, I want to shout out Devin. I keep forgetting to mention this actress's name. Her name is Jen Tulloch. And she's so great in this performance, but I loved her awkward kind of acceptance of what's happening. And then when Natalie goes, "Oh, I just wanted to let you know that Mark is such a great guy." And she's like, "That's, yeah, he's a real good egg." And then the way she just like turns cold immediately and
Hmm.
walks out the door, reminding her husband about feeding the baby. I'll be polite, just barely polite
Yep.
enough to get out
Hmm.
of this room. But yeah, great performance again from her. And we find out, of course, that she is meeting with Mark and that he is trying to come up with a light scheme to imprint these words. Who is alive? Should have put like a underline on who, I think. Do you think this is a good plan, first of all? Would you be helping?
Listen, I don't have a suggestion for anything better, first of
Right.
all, but yeah, it seems like you could actually damage your retinas. I feel like the message is a little too vague. I'm not sure once you're a different version of yourself that's going to make any sense to you. I mean, A for effort, but I'm not sure how effective it would have been.
I was, though, like I mentioned, I was at this moment, especially because it was the name of the title. I'm like, maybe they'll find a way to get the light source closer. I mean, I was trying to come up with a way where they can communicate through the elevator. Even if she's just placating him, I guess she's there to support him. So fine. And of course, this all leads up to him training himself later. But before we get there, we got two more scenes to talk about, pretty quick ones. One is Milchick back at the office, closing up for the day,
Hmm.
packing up the paintings, tucking them away. What did you think of this scene? They obviously included it for a reason. And like I said, nothing's really not considered in the show. So what do you read the way he's packing them back up again?
It seems like to me he's trying to forget all of this ever happened, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And maybe it's the beginning of him being a little bit more critical of what's going on there and whether he really believes in it or not and wants to help them effectuate their mission or not.
I agree with that. I think that this is very important. This scene tells us that there's a crack in the armor, that he got the promotion he wanted and things are not better, but they're worse. And I've seen that before. I felt like there are multiple times, even in the performance in the last week's episode, where Milchick was talking about the innies, and he's definitely trying to manipulate these people to going back in and doing what the company wants them to do. But I think the things he says about loving those innies, those people that he knows in there, is true. And now maybe he's trying to think about the immorality of what they're doing to these people. And where it's like he feels some of that on himself. And thinks how much worse that possibly is
Hmm.
to these innies, right?
Yeah.
One other really impressive scene, Cobell shows up, Helena's leaving work. This is happening at the same time Milchick is wrapping up work as well. She goes outside. She has a security guard with her, and Cobell's there. Cobell wants back, and at first, because I've seen this episode more than once, at first I was like, oh, maybe they had called her back, but Helena sees her and is not expecting to see her. So this is Cobell just showing up unsolicited and being like, you're taking me back and I'm going to run
Yeah.
MDR.
Yeah.
But their back and forth is really fascinating. I like that there's those positive and negative character traits, and they use all the cure language in their communication with each other. She says that I hear ego and arrogance when she hears Cobell saying that she can do this better. Milchick has to go. He's not built for this. And she responds, dedication and industry is how I achieved what I achieved. She goes, I earned this. I wasn't born into it. And then Helena says, I think you are overestimating your contributions and underestimating your blessings. From the outside looking in, I think that Cobell did do all this, but we don't know their full biographies.
Right. Sure.
There's the where, oh, okay, I'm just thinking about this now as things play out in this scene. Harmony says to Helena, you didn't have a choice but to call me back. And Helena's response to that was, are you sure? Which I didn't understand at the moment. And that's when Helena goes with a smartphone, by the way, first smartphone I think we've seen in the show. She calls Natalie and says, hey, can we get a meeting with the board? Stat. And Natalie's like, yeah, I'll set it up right now. And she's like, yeah, come back inside and we'll meet with them right now. How do you read this scene? Cobell freaks out, right?
She looks like they're trying to march her off to her execution.
Exactly. So what do you think she picked up on at that moment?
I don't know, but it seems like she feels there's some threat to her physical safety, the way she's acting.
Yeah, I was only now when I'm reviewing the notes and I'm thinking exactly that when she goes, you had no choice but to call me back. And Helena says to her, are you sure about that? And I'm like, is she thinking, wait a second, are you sure about that? Does that mean like you could disappear me?
I hadn't considered it, but it could.
And maybe that's her making that realization in the moment. I mean, that would be extremely nefarious if the show is actually killing people off. But here's the other thing. They don't have to kill her off. It's possible there might be a way to disappear her without killing her off. Casey's trapped inside that building.
Sure, you could just send her onto the severed floor and never let her get out, probably.
Exactly. And do we know?
She could be goat food.
Maybe that's what they're doing to them. And of course, that same exact night, this is all happening so fast. That same exact night, Mark is trying to permanently brand his retina. One of the times he opens up his eyes, he's got this blanket. I think my grandmother made me a blanket very close to this one, the one that he has wrapped over his head. I don't know where it is anymore, but it was very similar. And he opens his eyes and jump scare. Ragabi's standing right in front of his car.
Yes.
And did he call her? Like, how did she end up there?
I really don't know.
I thought in my head when she showed up, I'm like, he called her before he left the house. They were meeting there on purpose. But in rewatching it, it's like he doesn't call anybody. He's just there and she's there. So I don't know if she's tracking his movements or maybe he did call her and we just don't see it. But I'm like, how did she get there? I don't understand. I like how she just busts his chops too. Are you trying to what are you doing?
Yes.
And he's like, yes. And he does not want to let her in the car. All of this is very funny until it's not. And then she's like screaming at him, cursing at him. He finally unlocks the door. But then
that whole conversation, is that through a closed window? Because how could they hear each other so well? I can never hear each other I hear somebody well through a closed window.
I guess it depends on your car. I mean, our car is like is incredible now that it's like so quiet that you can't hear anything on the outside. My dad still drives around his 20-something-year-old, almost 30-year-old Corolla. And you're inside that car, and like when someone's standing outside, they might as well be standing next to you.
Okay,
there's no air seal in that.
That aligns with the dated
age of the car.
Cars,
exactly.
I guess,
yes. So it might be very realistic. But then as the conversation continues, then they mention your wife. And he just starts saying, what do you know about my wife? And she doesn't respond. But then he just explicitly says, is Gemma alive? And she says she was alive the last time I saw her, which is crazy.
And it really seems like burying the lead the last time that they talked, right? To not have mentioned that.
They even explained this in the plot, although I think that this is
they did, but I still think it's weak.
I think this is this is like problem solving in the script where
Yeah.
they're like, we need someone to give him this information to push him over the edge. Here's a perfect opportunity for her to say it. It would make sense if she knew because she's one of the heads there. So she may even be involved with whatever Cold Harbor is. So it makes perfect sense to have her say this. But then he says it. Why didn't you tell me before? And they do have a good explanation. We were interrupted, which is true, during the murder from season 1.
Right.
So that did happen. So that is true. And he did have to run outside so he wouldn't vomit in the room. I don't know if you remember this, by the way, when she kills a security guard. And she's like, don't throw up in here. You have DNA in here. And he goes sprinting out of the building and throws up outside. But anyway, so he did make a quick exit. So he would have missed whatever she had said there at the end, regardless. But I do agree. It's just conveniently them shoehorning her in here for additional revelations. And she's still trying to convince him at that point, and that this is the way to possibly pass information back and forth. And I think this is a really great character moment because we've seen him like say, I don't want to deal with this pain anymore, so sever me. Well, you've seen him have this kind of reaction when people are making fun of being a severed person. And then he goes to the punk club and he's just like, F lumen. And then he turns on them afterwards and starts making fun of them. And it's like this kind of often violent reaction he has to things like this. In a way, it makes perfect sense from his character point of view that he would just immediately be like, yes, let's do it. And I think part of that is just that he wants to do it because he may not have the courage to do it again. But it is fascinating that he just immediately switches on.
Yeah. To the discussion we had last week where I had thought that grief was motivating him at least equally, if not more, than the interest in figuring out what's going on with Gemma. This supports your side, which is that what's really driving him to get back in there is figuring out what happened to Gemma.
And I mean, there's the grief there too. I mean, that Adam Scott does a great job here. And that tear that falls out of his eye when he says, let's do it. Let's just do it. He's just feeling all those pain, all those emotions at the same time.
As much as I am curious about what happened to Gemma, I find on a human level much more interesting the idea of severing yourself to avoid the pain of grief, more of the eternal sunshine kind of idea.
Right.
So it might have been wishful thinking on my part.
I agree, but you have to think that at this moment, he can solve both things at the same time because he could potentially reconcile. And yes, now he's got to merge these two sides of himself and all the things he's been trying to run away from and deal with this other version of himself that he has been oppressing, basically.
Sure.
But rescuing that version of himself too. But then he knows what happened to Petey, and that could be catastrophic, obviously. It's one of those things where it's like, maybe he just has to know. If he can't live with it, then he'll take the risk because this could give him, it'll give him a resolution of some kind, right? Which he can't have right now. I mean, especially if she's still alive. I mean, it seems pretty clear that she's still alive. What else can you do at that point, right?
Right. True.
And then, of course, the whole integration sequence, which is incredible filmmaking, just beautifully done. And I love the way he's asking questions and he's forgetting the answers to them. It's what's your first memory? And he's like, wait. And then, of course, his first memory is Innie, Mark's first memory. And it's an incredible,
fascinating
sequence. And of course, that's the button on the episode. And like I said, I wouldn't have been surprised at all if that final moment with the needle drop for the Who and everything all happened. And it's like, see you in season 3.
Totally
but no,
agree.
you only have to wait one more week to see what happens next. Really impressive. You can usually tell when the show is like setting them up. We're going to see more of this. We obviously are going to see, for example, Irv is going to try to find the elevator. You'll see him with Felicia. There might be things that get in the way, etc. Right? So you can kind of see the plot machinations for that. But from the Mark situation, like, I really don't know where the show goes from here. It's like, it's insane uncharted territory right now.
Yeah, I don't know, but I am really excited to find out. Credit goes to them for keeping me hooked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone's going to be very hooked after this episode. It's going to be like one of those episodes where everyone, like the finale of season one, I think it's going to be one of those episodes where, again, the chatter's going to be like, are you watching it? You got to watch it. So people will be binging. And by the way, if you are going to binge the whole thing, you only have to go like 3 episodes past the first season binge at this point to get caught up to here. So it's, I think that there's going to be a lot of people binging this show in the next couple of weeks. One more stray observation. So the mammalian nurturable peoples, do they kind of talk like Rickon?
Hadn't thought about it. Maybe.
They have like a very weird phraseology
Very
in the
stilted.
way they
Yes.
talk.
Yes.
And it's very similar, by the way, not dissimilar to the whole weird excerpt that Natalie was reading about, like, oh, you can't calm your sadness with beer. You can only calm it with wine, which is very expensive. And that's why poor people are sadder than rich people.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously he doesn't say it that way. He says this very strange phrasing. But I was like, man, is this proof of some way that Rickon somehow emerged from one of these weird underground groups and is now out and about spreading some of the subconsciously spreading some of the
propaganda
propaganda out into the broader community. Anyway, just something I thought about in the moment. Maybe he's one of the goat people.
Maybe. Maybe he has a goat costume in the closet.
Well, we don't know what him and Devin get into, so
yeah, fair.
No kink shaming here. All right, I think that covers it. All right, thank you for the conversation. Hopefully my voice will be better later this week.
Yeah, I hope you have a quick recovery. It actually doesn't sound bad now, so hope it hangs in there.
I have just finished off my tea and I'm now sucking on a lozenge between talking.
Okay.
So I've been able to maintain it this whole time. All right, thanks again, and we will talk soon. Oh, and check out Paradise. I mean, if you want to, give that first episode a walkthrough. Yeah, I know you didn't. What you saw of it wasn't appealing to you. I don't know if you saw the twist at the end. Did you see the twist?
I don't think I did.
Give it a shot. Like I said, this is a puzzle box show that you can watch while you're making dinner. It's my example of it. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. You know the things you need to pay attention to. And the way I described it on the podcast was that it is like Scandal meets Lost. And it's just like,
I love both of those.
The things you need to pay attention to, they put a big exclamation point on it. So I don't think it's not a dense show, but it has big thoughts on its mind, actually. So will it all work? I don't know, but I think it'll be entertaining. So give it a shot. See what you think.
I'll give it a try.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.